Hi, this is Alex Belth, and welcome to Dig This. This week, I am really pleased to be joined in conversation by Derek Cianfrance, who is the director of the new feature film Roofman, starring Channing Tatum and Kirsten Dunst, which opens tomorrow, October 10th, in movie theaters nationwide. It's a really entertaining and charming movie based on rough events of a guy named Jeffrey Manchester, who in the early aughts was put in jail after having robbed over 40 McDonald's. And he managed to escape from prison and hole up in a Toys R Us for about 6 months. And it's this scenario that's the basis of Cianfrance's latest movie. He is, of course, the director of indie classics such as Blue Valentine and A Place Beyond the Pines. He's worked with lead actors such as Michael Fassbender, Mark Ruffalo, Bradley Cooper, Ryan Gosling, and now Channing Tatum. I'm really pleased that Derek was able to take some time out of his busy promotional schedule to rap with us here about the new movie, how it fits into his body of work, and what it's like to make a feature film based on somebody who is still alive. Anyway, dig in and enjoy. I think you'll appreciate it. He's a cool dude. Oh, Derek.
What's up, Alex?
What's going on, brother? How you doing, man?
I'm doing pretty good. How about yourself?
Yo, dude, am I part of a junket?
Yes. You're putting the junk back in junket.
Yeah, man. How exciting. You doing this all day?
I mean, I've been doing it for the last month.
Whoa.
It's been pretty nuts.
I've
done these before, but this is kind of like the most I've ever done.
Yeah. So, dude, right off the bat, I know you're busy, so let's just jump into it. But one thing that just struck me, when I first started dating my wife, we saw a movie, and at the beginning of the movie, they say, this is based on a true story.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, God, I hate when they do that. And my wife goes, this is based on a true story.
Uh-huh.
And I said, wow, so it works. You know what I mean? And I realized what a snob I was. And actually, my wife has much more, her tastes are much more in line with an audience's taste than my So, I really like the active, it wasn't, Roofman starts, it doesn't say this was based on a true story. It says, this is a true story and we're active here. And I was just sort of wondering about, the immediacy of making something that's based on real life. And yet at the same time, you're trying to create your own story that has its own a life to itself outside of the real story. How much of it is, when you decide to make a movie like this, do you know you're going to put that this is based on a true story immediately? Is that something that has to be there? And is it important?
I thought it was, it wasn't in my first draft of my first script, but then I started to realize that how crazy this guy's life was. And I started to kind of keep in check with my own experience of hearing his story. And I always remember thinking is this real? And it kind of led me on this research journey to talk to people in his life, anyone who would talk to me, from his mother to his brother to the sergeant that led up the SWAT, the task force that arrested him, to the judge that sentenced him to 45 years, to the prison truck driver that, who he escaped up under, to his girlfriend Lee, to the pastor of the church Ron, to anyone, to the dentist whose office he blew up, to anyone that would speak with me, I would speak with them. And I think the question was did this really happen? And what's your point of view on it? And I think one of the reasons I shot the movie down in Charlotte, North Carolina, where the events took place, again, was to just suspend my own disbelief, right? Because that's the point. That's the key to narrative movies, I think, is this, right? Suspension of disbelief, persistence of vision and suspension of disbelief. And I think I needed to do all those things to suspend my own disbelief. And so I put that at the beginning of the movie. I started putting it at the beginning of the script because I wanted people to not have to sit there and say oh God, this is bad writing or something like this. This is this. There was one version at one point where we had this is a true story, dot, 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 as told by a liar. And what ended up happening is when I played that, it immediately people laughed, right? But what that ended up doing was that it worked in a script, but when people saw it in the movie, every scene with Jeff, like immediately they were thinking, oh, how is he lying to me? And so it was like they were reading all of his performance, all of Channing's performance as like a wink. Or like where is like he's not and he's telling the truth to it's like a lot of people throughout the movie. So that didn't work. And so we just simplified it to its essence. This is a true story. And yeah. And just as a way to just set you into like a safe place while watching the movie, to know that this wasn't some screenwriter's um, imagination. Now, I will say that the movie, there was a point like in talking to Jeff, I spoke with him so many times over the years. He's in a maximum security prison in Raleigh, North Carolina. I could never call him. He has to call me. We've had so many conversations over the years, like probably 400 hours worth of talks over the years. And there was one moment where he said, Derek, this is my movie. I'm sorry, Derek, this is my story, but it's your movie. He was like, I want you to tell the movie the way you see fit. And I told him why I appreciate that. And I was like, yes, I'm not making a documentary here, and I'm not making a journalistic piece either. I'm going to make something that's cinematic, and I'm going to try to find the cinematic truth. And so there's certain things in the movie that had to adapt and change, but I think the overall truth of the story was still what shined. I mean, look, he did rob all those McDonald's. He did give people jackets when he put them in the freezer. He did break out and underneath the truck of the actual guy who broke him out. He did live in a toy store. He survived off of peanut M&Ms. He did get 14 cavities. He did blow up the dentist office. He did start dating someone at the church. He did donate toys to the toy drive. He did fall in love with her. He did become like a surrogate father. He did get cut off from his family. He did hide out in a tree, not a bush, to watch his kids play one day. He did go all the way to the airport with a plane ticket in the seat next to him with a path to freedom, and turn around because he wanted to, see his girlfriend one last time and take her out to dinner and tell her goodbye. So there's like so many aspects of it that were real. There was like little things that I did to just try to make it, to tell the story and to make the themes come alive, I think a
Yeah.
little bit more.
And Derek, then there's also so much, even you're talking about that, based on a true story told by a liar, that sets a whole tone for the entire thing. Was this tone something, and the sensibility of the movie, something that you went into it knowing what you wanted that to be, or was it something that developed either during the shooting of it or during the cutting of it, where you saw, okay, I don't want to, I want to err away from this. I want to lean into this. Was that something that you knew going in?
Well, Alex, you know who my wife is.
Yes.
And she's a huge inspiration to me, right? I think she's like one of the great artists. And I've always admired her perspective and her way to like look at things with humor, right? So I had this experience when I made I Know This Much Is True, where I feel like that was like the most complete I've ever felt making something. I feel like
You mean as a final product? You mean,
as a final product and the process of making it, it felt like I think the way I can express myself most clearly is through movies, right? I feel like that's the language that I speak most clearly. You and I having a conversation, I can't quite get to exactly what I mean. If I write something, I can't quite get exactly to what I mean. But movies is like the clearest form of communication for me to kind of communicate what's in my heart, what's in my soul, what's in my brain. Um, how I see the world. So that felt like the most clear to me. came out during the pandemic, right? And I remember I had a lot of friends tell me that they had to stop watching it when Mark Ruffalo cut off his hand. And he cut off his hand at like 1 minute into the movie. So I was like, shit, the world's tough, like it's a hard time out there. People, they don't need more homework, they need something that not an escape, but something that's going to make them want to watch, and I was thinking maybe cutting off hands and children dying in their cribs and all this stuff was like maybe like a bridge too far, like too much. Like to me, it felt right at the time, and I still don't regret that at all because, like I said, it's clear. But I just felt like, yeah, I needed to maybe not like the darkness of my imagination sometimes is like it's like a cocoon, or it's like a boa constrictor, and it like gets warm and cozy in there, and then the next thing you know you're just all like in the darkness, and it's just like it felt maybe a selfish or something. So I wanted to share a little more, and really I was looking at Shannon and her work and just thinking about comedy more, comedy and how comedy can uh, you can still talk about the same things, but maybe do it and make people laugh, and how much harder that is. And then I was thinking Shannon's pretty like serious in her real life, you know. She makes these comedies, but she's like kind of serious. And I was thinking with me in my life, maybe I'm not as serious all the time as my tragedies are. I'm like super optimistic. I'm like very, 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 very almost like toxically optimistic. And I was thinking that comedy and tragedy are like flip sides of the same coin. And that maybe with this movie, what I could do is flip that coin in the air and you would see comedy, tragedy flip. And you wouldn't know which side of the coin you were on because it didn't matter. And I was thinking that, like, when you slip on a banana peel, it hurts and people laugh.
Yep.
And that pain and comedy are kind of intertwined. And so I thought maybe that was the tone I was thinking of before I went in to shoot it. And just try to communicate that to all the actors and communicate it to all the team to try to find where the funny and the pain, the comedy and the tragedy intersected.
Yeah, because on one level, just even as an audience member, the notion of your protagonist getting, holing up in a Toys R Us and then being able to kind of cruise around at night. Well, this is sort of a fantasy that we're sort of like
Yes.
living vicariously with the character. But then there's also, I don't know, sort of the way that you film it when, he's on the lam when he goes into this place. So I don't know if it was a handheld shot that's just following behind him, but when he even goes into the Toys R Us at first, maybe there's a car that passes behind him and there's a horn and it's tense. It's tense. And once he gets into the Toys R Us, it's actually somewhat surreal. It's not just sort of like from a distance bubblegum, like you feel the tension of the moment as well.
Yeah.
As well as, there's a sort of disorienting thing. And then there's later a sort of scene with him and a sort of row of Tickle Me Elmo dolls, which
Yeah.
is borderline awful. You know what
Uh-huh.
I mean? I mean, it
Yeah.
sort of starts as a funny thing, but I think that's interesting. Like, you could see so much of the a filmmaker's or storyteller's approach as being sort of going for the laugh and being really glib. But there also seems to be some rules of engagement of reality in this movie that are sort of unyielding. I'm thinking mostly about the comic tone and then the violence.
Mm.
And, without giving anything away, there is one scene towards the end of the movie in which there is a sort of a scene of disruptive violence amongst a group of characters. And it's not quite as awful as the Coke bottle to the face in Altman's Long Goodbye, or when Keith Carradine gets shot in McCabe and Mrs. Miller. But there's nothing flippant about it. And the violence is sort of awkward, clumsy, and distressing.
Yeah.
And we live in this world where like
As
just
violence is.
well, that's right. And I was wondering about that, Derek, because you talk about falling on a banana peel and we laugh. We've been doing this since the Buster Keaton days, speaking of Shannon. But seriously, when you look at your reels in the morning before you get out of bed, you can see so many acts of violence, whether it's somebody slipping at a construction site, but we're almost immune to what happens with real violence. And I thought that that was a really interesting choice that you made. Was that something that's super intentional on your part?
I hate violence. I don't watch the reels. It just it violence. Uh, I just hate it. I hate it so much. When I was a kid, I went to like a Denver sports fan, specifically Broncos and Nuggets,
Yep.
as you know. Um, I went, but I never went to games. I don't like going to live sporting events, maybe because of this experience. But I was 6 or 7 years old. We went to a Broncos game, and I was sitting there, and people were getting drunk and a little out of hand. And I remember this commotion happening behind me, and I heard this ping, this like the sound of like this high pitched like ping, like this repeated ping. And I looked around, and there was a guy with longer hair, and another guy was had a hold of his hair, and he was systematically like smashing his face into a pole. And the guy whose face was getting smashed was everything that was white on his face, his eyes, his teeth were now red. And he had like this stunned look on his, like he was frozen. He was like stunned. And the guy didn't stop. And I remember my father pulled us out of there. And so like I've always just recoiled against violence, and I haven't had a lot of violence in my movies.
Yeah.
There's been very few guns in my movies. When they do come out, I mean, in Roofman, there's no gunshots, right? In Place Beyond the Pines, there's one gunshot, and it definitely has a reverberation. So I'm very conscious of what violence I will and won't put in my movies. And I think that the character of Jeff, the only reason I think I could make the story about him was that the contradictions of his violence, that he did have a few violent acts, this one main violent act in his life. Uh, but it was and he definitely traumatized some people, but it was also the contradiction of that. Like when he locked people in a freezer, he gave them a jacket. And when he broke out of prison, he didn't hide in the woods and eat rainwater and grubs. He went to a toy store and ate, baby food and candy. And I think it was that contradiction that made me kind of interested in him and thinking about his humanity was the thing that made him a worse criminal. And I think that moment was something that was like really hard for him to do. And he felt like it was like the last resort for him because the person was going for their gun. But still, I wanted to show it as as violent and as effective as possible. So you could actually feel it
Yes.
when
And
you're
also
watching it.
without giving away the plot point, there is something that's sewn up between these two characters in the aftermath of that
Yeah.
that is fucking beautiful. And I won't talk about it
Yeah.
what it is because it's very sort of subtly done, but it's a sort of thread that you're sort of wondering how it's going to play out, and it plays out in a kind of minor key in the aftermath of this other thing, but in a way that you're like, wow, that that thing, you allowed it to happen without sort of pushing it too much.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, for
so
sure. For sure.
Derek,
When I watched that in the theater, that section, that moment that you're talking about, though, it's amazing. It's amazing watching this movie in a movie theater because it's like built for a theater, right? Because it has that kind of audience reaction built in. It does feel like the most like roller coaster ride that I've ever made, not as an escape, because on a roller coaster, you're not escaping anything. You're like in it. You're putting yourself through real, like real emotional thrills, I guess. And this movie has that same thing. And in that moment, I always hear the gasps. And I think it's because people are like they didn't realize he could go there or something, but he did,
Yep.
and it causes you to look at him a little differently, and it also makes you understand how desperate he was, and it reminds me of like a family member or something that just you see them do makes a bad choice,
Yeah.
and it doesn't mean you love them any less, but you're mad at them for that,
Yep.
you know? And so I kind of want, and that's why this movie, like when I talk about it being a roller coaster, it doesn't feel like escapism in that way. It's not like you go to this movie to just escape your troubles. It kind of puts you in the middle of some of these, it makes you ask those questions or confront those things and those feelings in a way that, I don't know, uh, I don't know, maybe feels more human. I don't know.
Yeah, well, the other thing is that you're very conscientious in okay, so for instance, the scene in which he takes his girlfriend and their two daughters out for a test drive with a used car salesman, right? So this
Mhm.
is like a scene in which we get to live vicariously on a kind of roller coaster ride kind of thing, and his sort of enthusiasm and his desire to make a good impression is sort of leading the charge on this sort of joyride, but it's also irresponsible and nerve-wracking on a certain level. And so you sort of feel like as an audience member that you get to enjoy some of the vicariousness of that scene, but you're not indulging in the like, yeah, what a great guy. You're like, yeah, but yeah, we're also seeing this guy's sort of not delusion, but his inability to sort of really take stock of what he's doing entirely.
Yeah, it's all about Kirsten Dunst's reaction to that scene. I was thinking, if you this whole movie's built around some sense of wish fulfillment, right? You live in a toy store. I thought about when I was a kid and I watched George Romero's Dawn of the Dead. It's like this would be awesome, right? To live in a mall, but there's zombies everywhere, and then you gotta and it's never gonna end well, and I was thinking about this with Jeff. The real Jeff did live off of candy and did get, if you live your dream, if your dream is to eat peanut M&Ms, if you love peanut M&Ms and you spend all day eating peanut M&Ms, you're going to get some cavities. And sure enough, the real Jeff did get like 14 cavities, And when he was living in that toy store, at first it was kind of awesome because he was surrounded by toys, but he only thought he was going to be there for a month, and after a month, his friend Steve was supposed to get him a passport so he could get out of the country to a place with no extradition laws. But when he called Steve, Steve had gone to Afghanistan for 6 months. So Jeff got like a stay on his extension on his sentence in the toy store, and that's when all those toys started talking to him and like making him crazy. And that's when the scene happened when he beat up the Elmos, which was a real scene that happened in his real life as well. And I think with the car ride, it's the same thing. It's like there's a wish fulfillment in there, but there's a reality. And uh and there's a cost and there's a like real stakes in there. And I think Jeff, because of his experience in the military, I think they were always going to be safe in that car. And but still he didn't have the right to do that. And I think Kirsten's response to that scene is what makes it valid. And as I was cutting the movie together, that scene, we didn't actually need her response in that scene for the plot, for the narrative, but we absolutely needed it because as an audience, you need to see someone say, and you need to see her stand up for herself and say, no, this is not right. Because Jeff is just extreme.
Right.
He just goes over the top. I think he's I've always thought like if he has to kill an ant, he does it with a sledgehammer. Like he doesn't know when is enough. And and I relate to that. Shannon told me that that this was the most me that I'd ever written into a film. In terms of like just sometimes doing too much.
Yeah, bro, I was going to
Um,
ask you about that, man.
uh,
There's a couple of echoes in this movie. I think it's the line is maybe said twice. Something to the effect of, bro, when Kirsten Dunst says to him, you don't need to try so hard. You don't need to
yeah,
do all these things. You just need to be here.
uh-huh,
And his presence is going to be more valuable to them
yeah.
than anything he could do, give, or provide. Is that something that you, as a man, a filmmaker, is that a sentiment that hits close home to you?
I think it does. I think one of the reasons I wanted to tell this initially was like my kids are getting older now, and I was really thinking about like the remaining time left, and I was thinking of things like bedtime stories. And I was thinking that like when I started writing this movie is like I had read my children their last bedtime story, and when it happened I didn't know about it. I didn't know. I wasn't It became something that you did so many times, and then one day it was over, and there was no more bedtime stories, and you're just never conscious of that. And I was thinking about like, okay, how many summers do I have left with them? How many more family vacations can we take? How many more meals can I make? How many times can I make breakfast for them? Um, uh, okay, how many more Christmases are there? And and I think what the way I started to deal with that was to like be ultra conscious and present and overly aware of all those things at all the times. And so for dinner on a Tuesday night, I was gonna like smoke a brisket for 26 hours, you know what I mean? And it was gonna be, and then Wednesday I was gonna do, you know, whatever. It just go all the way because I wanted to be there and have everything be memorable to everyone. And so Jeff, I was thinking about Jeff, this prisoner who also didn't know how much time he had left with his kids. And one day he had no time, because he made all these huge mistakes, and now he's in prison for 45 years, and he can't have dinner with his kids anymore. And he needed to get her a bike, but like now he can't even ride it with her. And yeah, I was thinking a lot about, we all live in this society where we're all told that we need things and we need stuff and the more stuff and the more things we have, the more value we have, and the more things we get, the more experience we could have. And I was thinking about being a boy growing up and like walking into my living room on Christmas morning and just seeing all the presents that were there and just thinking that they were great, but I actually don't remember any of those presents. I just remember my parents, and the time we spent together. And so that became one of the kind of morals to the story, especially when you have someone like Jeff. When people go to prison, it's called time. You get time, and it's all Jeff has is time to think about these moments. And I think what he gave people a lot of things, but what he really needed to give them was time, and that might have been enough. So yeah, that was something I definitely every movie I make, I'm trying to like figure something very personal out inside of it. There's other things that are like, yeah, there's a lot of those like secrets and things hidden inside the movie.
Yeah, and there's also just a sort of through line from some of your other movies about,
Mhm.
these are stories about men who just have an incredible amount of yearning to be men that they are not, or the gulf between who they want to be and where they are.
Yeah,
And just the tension between that of people with noble intentions, perhaps, but sort of damaged on the way to getting there. And you as a filmmaker exploring that without sort of arriving at pat, clever, or even sentimental conclusions for them.
there's never I never go into a movie with exactly like a message or something
Yep.
or what I'm trying to say or what I want people. It's more of like I'm trying to just explore like a feeling or a something in my subconscious. I try to listen to my inner voice and just follow it. So all those things came from that. Um, a lot of these, a lot of the men in my movies, yeah. I mean, all of them are. Every movie I've made is somehow about parents. I think having kids myself has been like the most transformative, profound experience of my life. I've never experienced so much like love or responsibility. As
Responsibility is a big part of, I think, the components to your male characters too. Huge.
yeah,
Yeah, it's
huge.
it's it's a huge part of it. Yep.
Yeah. And so I'm really there for it. I'm like so there for it. And I think all of my subconscious is like that's what's playing out. And that's what I try to like follow when I'm writing. It's just like where is that inner voice taking me? Where are those things? And that's where it took me on this movie. Yeah. I mean, I guess that's probably why I was attracted to Jeff in the first place.
Yep. Yep. And so Derek, when you start filming this,
Uh-huh.
how much how much is sort of open to like, let's figure this out. When you're working with your actors, whether it's blocking a scene or even adhering to the dialogue of a scene, is it pretty much, I worked with the Coen brothers and they pretty much, if they wrote an or a in their script, they sort of, that's how they wanted it to be said versus other directors, who are going to throw away kind of the veracity of the words on the page and it's going to become its own thing. How did that work on this movie for you?
Yeah, I don't really, since I'm not a writer first and foremost, since like movies are the way that I express myself, I don't, to me, the script is just an instigation point. Although I will say I try to always make sure I get the script because you spend so much time on the script. I want to make sure before I leave the day I get the script, but that's not the first thing I look for. The first thing I look for is I tell my actors to surprise me. I try to always set up situations where they can be alive. Sometimes actors they'll like rehearse the night before, or you'll do an audition and you'll work it in the audition, and then what happens? You come to set with a series of like expectations of what you think it needs to be, and to me that always leads to like disappointment because you can never I mean, expectations to me are like my nemesis, right? So I try to think about preparations. How do I prepare for a moment to capture a moment? I'm always thinking of Halley's Comet moments. It's like Halley's Comet comes once every 77 years. If you miss it, you have to wait another 77 years for it to come back. So you just have to be prepared for those moments. And so what I'm trying to do is like whether or not it's the first take or whether it's not, or whether it's the 96th take to get a moment, to find a moment that can't be replicated. And that's ultimately what I'm trying to do. And so I go through like a lot of expense. I put a lot of effort in like creating situations for my actors. They could be, example on Roofman would be like building the toy store. So that Toys R Us was a shell of a Toys R Us when we found it. It was, there was no tiles. Someone had stripped all the copper wiring, so there was no electricity. We had to build those things, one tile, one fluorescent tube, one shelving unit, and then one Tickle Me Elmo at a time. And it was like a major expense. I've always said it's like, that was like my Fitzcarraldo. That was pulling the steamship over the mountain because it was impossible to do on this budget. Um, the way I eventually convinced my everyone that we had to do it and somehow found the money in the budget was I told my producers that I promised Channing that I would build him a toy store. But the reason is because I'm not the kind of director that can just say, like, I need to suspend my disbelief when I'm shooting. So I need to find myself immersed in a situation. And And I want Channing to be able to walk into that toy store and to feel something. I want Peter Dinklage when he comes in that toy store to know he manages that toy store and he's the boss of that toy store. And so I would do things like in terms of rehearsals, I'd have like Peter, I've cast Kirsten and Emery Cohen in this movie, but you own this store, you run this store, so you got to make sure that you want to hire them and you want them to put on a Toys R Us, uniform. So Peter got to do, job interviews with Kirsten for an hour and Emery for an hour, and Peter put him through the ringer. And does that stuff ever go on screen? I think you feel it, when you see the movie because it's those relationships and the power struggle is so clearly there. Other things that I do with my actors is like, that's like fun for me, and that's part of like my exploratory experimentation, process is like I wouldn't let. So when I told Channing I was going to cast Kirsten, he got nervous. He got like I could tell he was very nervous because Kirsten's very good, right? I mean, she's like a first off like a marvel of an actor. Like I can't imagine someone who's been a child actor who's like continued to get better as they got older and continued to be like normal.
Yeah.
Like Kirsten is like a regular person.
Yeah.
She's so unaffected
And the
by this.
naturalism totally comes through in her performance, whereas to your
Yeah,
point, a lot of times you have that precocious child actor, teenage actor. It's very rare that Jodie Foster, they end up becoming an adult actor that is like even better than they were with that natural quality they had as a young
exactly.
person.
Jodie Foster is a great example of someone else who's done it, you
Yeah.
know. But anyway, so you got so I knew Channing was nervous, and so I was like, okay, you can't meet Kirsten. I was like, yeah, I don't want you to ever see her. So as we were prepping and as we were going through hair and makeup tests and whatever, and like anytime Kirsten was shooting, I'd make sure Channing and her never cross paths. Channing would be in his like hiding hole, his nest or whatever, and he could watch Kirsten on the monitor, but he could never talk to her. I made sure they just never bumped into each other and said, "Oh, hey, I'm Channing, I'm Kirsten," until that scene where they're at the Red Lobster. And so what ended up happening that day is like Kirsten's in there with all those ladies who are all from the church and all local, Charlotte people. Some of them are like real people from Jeff's real life, and they had gone out a couple of times to TGI Fridays. They'd gone bowling together. They had their own like real church group. I go outside for Channing. He's about ready to come in for the scene, and the thing Channing tells me is he says, "I hope she likes me." And I realize at that moment it's half like Channing hoping that Kirsten likes him, and the other half is Jeff hoping that Lee likes him. So I love finding the place where like the two fiction and nonfiction kind of come together, and they're in they're linked, and you can't tear them apart from each other. So now when Channing walks in, that for the first time he's so overwhelmed with meeting Kirsten that he doesn't always remember all of his lines. No one does. Everyone's a little nervous, but like I use that beginning of that first take with him walking in because it was all there. And in the second take, they're good actors, so they can still get there, but it just didn't have that thing. So then we just work it and work it and work it, and I will always use something better than what I've written, if it feels more true or if it feels more surprising or if it's that Haley's Comet moment.
Yeah. It's funny. I just read this biography of Sam Shepard, and he talked about being on location of Days of Heaven with Terrence Malick, and they were setting up a shot, and all of a sudden some geese started flying overhead, and they were
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
"No, wait, we got to go. We got to follow the geese because we're in this moment, and you don't know when that's going to happen again."
No.
But it's amazing because you see a scene like that, and it's so charming. And again, that's where there's sort of rules to the logic of your world in this movie, because you could say, oh, Channing Tatum goes in and charms a bunch of women. seems like he could do that in his sleep, right? I mean,
Uh,
he's fucking Channing Tatum. We know him as a very amiable, affable guy. He's gorgeous looking. This would be no problem for him. But then to realize all the sort of subtleties that even for the actors that are going on in that situation, that's why the scene in your movie really works because it's not over the top with its charm. It's not
mhm.
phony with its charm. Because Kirsten
It's
Dunst
not easy.
and Kirsten Dunst's character is sort of how we're seeing him. You know,
Yeah.
if he was too slick, she wouldn't fall for him because she's the one who's sort of she's the one who really knows herself. She's a real grown up.
Yeah, absolutely. She's the ultimate truth teller, I think.
Yeah. So Derek, you make 6 episodes of this show on HBO with Mark
Mhm.
Ruffalo, and it's shot for television. Now I know
Uh-huh.
there's a great difference. There's less of a difference perhaps now between television and movies, but to your point, this is a movie, and seeing it in the big
Yeah.
screen. Is there any difference from the way that you're filming something from a technical point of view when you're shooting it for a big screen versus for television?
I mean, we shot both projects on 2 perf 35 millimeter. It's shot it on film because I think for both stories, they both, I know this much is true, takes place in the 20th century, takes place in the 10s, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. And I felt like I couldn't use a digital format because the electricity is just different,
Yeah.
and film is tactile and analog, and I needed that because that was around during the times of the story. And I feel like with Roofman's the same. It takes place in 2004. I mean, if I was to shoot on a digital format, it would have to be like SD. And I love SD video. I love like Grant Gee's Meeting People is Easy and Corinne's Julian Donkey Boy and Vinterberg's Celebration. I think those are some of the great DV movies. But with this, I just knew I needed something. I couldn't shoot this on DV. It had to be
But do
I
you
just didn't. I didn't want people to see the texture. I wanted them to be lost in it,
yeah, yeah.
and so I shoot it the same way. I mean, it's different crew, right? I know this much is true. My director of photography is Jody Lee Lipes, who has a certain uh, uh, aesthetic, which I really loved, and I thought it would match that those characters in that world. Uh, with I know I'm sorry with Roofman, I cast my entire team from Blue Valentine. Everyone, my cinematographer Andre Perec, my costume designer Aaron Bennick, my production designer Inbal Weinberg, my producers Jamie Patrick, Lynette Howell, Alex Orlovsky, my set still photographer Davi Russo, my editors Jim Helton and Ron Patain, my makeup person Leo Wan, my hair person Bobby Deal. I just Christopher Bear, who did the music. He's the drummer for Grizzly Bear, who
Why?
did Blue
Why did you
Valentine.
get the old gang back together?
I think I was having a midlife crisis.
Yeah.
And I think I think I didn't buy a Ferrari. I think I built a toy store, and I think I had a reunion. I think I forced a reunion. But all those people in my life, that we were all together at a certain point where we were all just young and hungry and desperate and passionate, and money didn't mean anything to us. All that meant something to us was like expression and truth, and we were all just like we were all like off Broadway, like makers wanting so much someday to get on Broadway. And so we made Blue Valentine, and then we all kind of did have our chances. We've all played on Broadway. We've all had some Broadway stuff that we've done. And so when Roofman came along, I was like, okay, let's get that band back together and let's go to Broadway. But then we got our budget and realized, oh shoot, movies are different now. It's harder to make a movie. I kept on hearing from the studios as I was trying to sell this that we don't really make these kind of movies anymore. And I was like, well, this is going to be like my version of Capra. And they're like, yeah, we
Who's
don't make
Capra?
Frank Capra. Frank Capra. Yeah, exactly. Who? And so we had, this was basically an independent film again. We did not have the money we needed to make the movie. We did not have the money we needed to build a Toys R Us or to shoot on film or to shoot on location in North Carolina or to have all these cast members that my casting director Bonnie Timmerman got to be in the movie. Like we just couldn't afford it. So everyone did it for less. Everyone It was like flying an airplane through a needle. The eye of a needle. It was an impossible thing that we just managed. I mean, if I showed you like how many times we like I had to sell like my back end or put my fee back into the movie just to be able to just keep going. We just kept doing that all the way through the edit until we just like there was no more like Hail Mary passes to do. And what ended up happening was like all those people that were once young and hungry and now had kind of made it, we're all like so like mad that we had to like what do you mean we can't, like we're not going to be able to be professionals again? And so everyone had to go back. What I told them, I was like, this is an opportunity for us all to see if we still have that part of ourselves that are going to do it for the right reasons. We're not doing this for money. We're not doing this for anything. We're just going to do it for the purity of making something again, because we're still young and hungry, middle-aged. And I'm,
So you talked about getting these guys back together, kind of forcing it. Use the word
yes,
force. You didn't say no. So it's from back when you guys were all young and hungry. Now you're trying to replicate the thing. How did it work?
it was beautiful. But it was different because we were like older now. And we were also so familiar with each other. It was intense. It was like very it wasn't like a first date. Like if you go on a first date with someone, you try to show them your best side. But if you're like a family member with someone, you show them your worst side, and they still love you. And so we all like knew each other so well, and I think we were all like in just. I mean, there was none of us were getting any sleep. We were shooting. I mean, our first schedule was to do the film. Our first schedule was 55 days. We ended up having 35 days, and so it was like we just had to. It was like double time. We were sprinting this marathon, and I couldn't have done it without them all. They were this was the only crew that could have done this, but we all paid the like emotional and physical price for it. At the end of this movie, it took me probably 9 months to recover, from it. And it was a lot. I don't know how many times you can, like my production designer, Imbal Weinberg, who's just like a warrior of cinema, who built that whole Toys R Us with her great team. It's like she asks me, she was like, does it have to be that hard? Because it was impossible.
Yeah. And does this sort of color what you think you'll do next? You're like, oh my God, the next one it's going to keep taking this much out of me. And this is it. On some level, you think of directing as a young person's game. But then again, there's people like, John Huston's last two movies, or The Dead and Prizzi's Honor, did pretty well. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
but do you feel like the way you make movies, or the way that the industry is, that the making movies the way that you want to express yourself is going to take this kind of.
I don't know, because when I did I Know This Much Is True, it wasn't. We just had this. We had. I shot I Know This Much Is True in 116 days, and it felt like being on vacation the whole time.
Yeah.
So it's just different. And that was super heavy and hardcore,
Yeah.
and we had the time of our lives. And when we did Roofman, it was the hardest thing we've ever done, and it maybe is the most accessible movie. And so you just never know what that experience is going to be like. I mean, I'm always going to just follow my process and follow my inner voice and try to make what I think I should be making. And I know there's going to be bumps in the road, and there's going to be things that feel like a breeze, and some things that are very, there's going to take just a lot of uh I don't know, intensity to get through it. I mean, it's always a marathon. It's always a marathon. I think what I've learned though is like exercise is like key. And my boys are both like very fit, and they're very much into like weightlifting, and so like I'm letting them train me so
Nice.
that I can be prepared and to have the stamina, endurance to do it.
Totally. Totally.
That's
And
what
just
it's
one
about.
last thing, Derek, because I know you
Yeah.
got like to boogie, but I'm not asking really for a comparison, but I just thought about it. I was like, Ryan Gosling, Bradley Cooper, Michael Fassbender, Ruffalo, and now Channing Tatum. These are like some heavyweight star actors, movie star actors of their time. What was it that Channing Tatum brought to this role that was like, wow, I haven't had this experience with an actor before? Or
Mhm.
what kind of qualities did he have that maybe surprised you that you didn't expect?
Well, first off, all those actors are like amazing. I was just like huge fans of all of theirs. If I go back to Gosling, first off, I'll say like Gosling was the person that first believed in me, him and Michelle, after like I had 12 years of everyone saying no to me. Ryan and Michelle somehow saw something in me. And if they hadn't have given me a chance, I wouldn't, I mean, you and I'd be talking together, but not on your podcast for, or Substack about anything. We'd be talking about something else. I wouldn't have been making all these movies if Ryan and Michelle hadn't have said, okay, we believe in you, or believe in what you believe in. Um, because that's really what it's about, I think. I feel like I always think when I'm making anything, it's not me. It's like I feel like I'm the first person to see like the sun. And I feel like as a filmmaker, I'm drawn to the energy of this of some kind of energy source, and I start to orbit it. And people in my life come to me and I've said, "Look at that. Do you see that? You see what I'm seeing?" And slowly, if you're lucky, more and more people start orbiting it. But Ryan and Michelle were the first actors to kind of see what I was seeing, and that was awesome. Um, so Channing is one of these rare actors. I remember the first time I saw him was in Guide to Recognizing Your Saints. And I only saw that movie once, but I'll never forget being in the movie theater and seeing this person walk down the street with his shirt off, but he had like a vest on, and he looked so beautiful. And the way his body moved was like a dancer. And I tilted up and I saw his face, and it looked like a boxer's face. And so his body was like, he moved like Gene Kelly, but he looked like Marlon Brando. And I thought, like, wow, he is like an image of wounded masculinity. He's so beautiful. You couldn't take your eyes off him. And then he would be in an action movie. And it's like, he was doing all of his own stunts, and he was just always like a thrilling action star. And then he was great in love stories, and then he was amazing. Like his comedies were like, he has some of the most iconic moments in the last 20 years in comedies. And his dramatic stuff was always like super vulnerable. And then he was, at the same time, he was like doing autobiographies of his life as a stripper. And so I was like, wow, he's courageous too. Like I felt like he was like the full package. um and so when I'd spent like 3 years interviewing Jeff and all of the people in Jeff's life, and I had a script that I thought was pretty good, and I needed to find someone to be in it, and I thought of Channing, and I met with him in Prospect Park, and we had like a 6 hour walk through the park, and I never pitched him on the movie in that 6 hours. I just tried to understand and learn about Channing as a person, as a man. I found that he was like, his daughter was the most important thing in his life, and that he was dealing with like custody. And I thought that was kind of like Jeff, and I kind of got a sense of his sense of humor and his physicality. And I was like, yeah, Jeff needs to have some real physical chops in this. And not every actor knows how to move anymore, because so much of acting is dialogue. Um, but Channing can move. And I needed, I wanted this to feel a little like, I always thought Jeff was a little bit like Chaplin, like this man with a boy's heart. And I thought Channing had that as well. He had that boy's heart, and I felt like I could. I had a friend that went out that was at a wedding with him, and my friend didn't know anybody. It was like a bunch of famous people at this wedding, and my friend didn't know anyone. And he said that Channing like took him under his wing the whole dinner, and so I just knew he had a heart to like care for people. So I called I say goodbye to Channing. I called my co-writer Kurt Gunn, and I was like, I think it's Channing. So we spent the next 9 months writing for him. And I think, like Jeff in his real life, I think he loves movies so much, and I think he spent so much of his life doing all these crazy, stupid things that he was doing. I think he was the protagonist in his own movie when he was living his life. I think he was imagining the movie he was making. And I think that movie that he was making was kind of a crime movie. It was kind of a love story. It was kind of a tragedy. It was kind of a comedy. It's a prison break movie. And I was like, okay, what actor? Channing can like wear all those hats. He can jump between genres like effortlessly. And he's got the right heart. And the most important thing in the world is his daughter. And so rewrote it with his voice in mind, gave it to him, and he said yes. And I don't think there's another person on the planet that could have done it. And what I love most about his performance is like there's no wink in it.
Exactly. Exactly. There's no wink in the entire movie. And
Yeah.
when I saw the preview, I was like, "Oh, is this Derek doing a wink movie?" Like,
No.
doesn't seem like him, but like, okay, so let's see how this goes. And then it's like, no, no, actually, it's almost like, with Altman, going back to Altman, like he'd set up these scenarios where you were expecting the genre to go this way, and then he'd kind of zig when you expected to zag. Not that you were doing that in a provocative way, you were just being authentic to yourself, but
Yeah.
there's no cleverness in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's amazing. And Derek, just one last thing. It's just so funny listening to you talking about Gosling and Michelle Williams, and before mentioning your own sense of optimism. And it sounds like, to be a filmmaker, you need to be incredibly optimistic and like borderline delusional,
Yes.
and that's sort of who Jeff is in the movie, right?
100%. 100%. Yeah. He and the real Jeff in real life is like that. He is so after the events of this movie, Jeff, they were really mad at him, and he served 9 years in solitary confinement. And as I was talking to Jeff, I was like, how did you survive that? Because you sound, first off, when you talk to Jeff, he sounds like a boy still. And I'm like, how did you do that 9 years? And he said, well, I imagined I built houses. And I was like, tell me more. And he was like, so I would imagine that I had $100,000, and I would build a house for $100,000 in my mind for me and my kids. And he was like, everyone had their own rooms. I knew how much the hinges were. I knew every inch of this house. I knew exactly what we had in this $100,000 house. I would live in that house, and I would spend 6 months of my life every waking hour dreaming of that house. And he was like, once I had that house completely memorized, I'd give myself $1 million, and then I'd build myself $1 million house. And so he spent his whole time building houses. And there was a time when I realized with this movie, the title Roofman felt like it was the right movie, but I started to remember my father telling me at one point, I put a roof over your head. And I started realizing what the movie was going to really be about, and it was that optimism and that responsibility and uh, that focus of trying to somehow be a provider.
Yeah. And you as a filmmaker, there's some grace in that. Is as difficult and realistic as the world is, it's not just an unremittingly cruel world, which we know it is, but
Yeah,
there is room for grace in this story as well.
100%. And that came from the real people in the movie.
Totally.
It came from Lee and from Pastor Ron. They were the ones who brought the grace to my perspective. Because before I met both of them, I didn't know if I was going to be making Taxi Driver, a movie about a sociopath. It was when I met Ron and Lee, and they talked to me about how much Jeff was like the greatest adventure of their life and how much they didn't regret a thing. They didn't feel like suckers. They didn't feel like gullible. They felt like their life with Jeff was real. And so they met all of his greatest mistakes with even greater grace and forgiveness. And I thought that was a good, in this day and age, I thought that was a good way, a good thing to put into the world.
Yeah, particularly with the church being a very big part of, without getting into actual religion or,
Yeah.
but just the idea of church community being like a really unifying force is just, it's unapologetic in the movie. And it's sort of one of its quiet strengths, I think, too.
Yeah. Yeah, not because the church also is seen as a lot, it gets redefined as a lot of different things in our society. And I asked Pastor Ron one time, I was like, tell me about the Bible from your perspective. And he was like, well, first thing you got to know is the Old Testament's judgment, the New Testament's grace. He was like, I tend to live my life erring on the side of grace. And I was like, wow, okay, here's Jeff, judged pretty harshly by society, sentenced to prison for 45 years. Maybe the movie could also see him with that grace.
Yep. Yep. Derek, this is awesome, man.
Alex, thank you.
Thank you. That was Derek Cianfrance, and his movie is Roofman, opening tomorrow, October 10th. Starring Channing Tatum, Kirsten Dunst, Peter Dinklage, Lakeith Stanfield, Ben Mendelsohn, Juno Temple, and an all-around stellar supporting cast. Check out the movie. It's really winning. Thanks again to Derek for joining us, as well as the man in the blue bathrobe for providing the tunes, and John Partham, as always, for making things sound groovy. This is Alex Belth, and I will smell you later.